Welcome to Our Girl Relationships. On this channel, we discuss day-to-day problems people face in their lives. Let's start with the video.
I have read many overwhelming stories about mother-in-laws. Still, I said to myself they are far-fetched. We are a reflection of one of our parents or both, and if my fiancé is such a sweetheart, his parents must be angels. Little did I know I was incredibly wrong. I had just moved to North Carolina for a job as a dentist. I got an unusual invite from a colleague for a church program. I'm not much of a churchgoer, even though I'm Christian. I decided to attend this church service during the Christmas holiday in 2014. This day marked a turning point in my life. This was where I met my husband, Philip, and we exchanged pleasantries and got talking. We only spoke for a little over 40 minutes, but it seemed we had known each other for years. Philip and I became friends soon after our first encounter, got into a relationship, and eventually got engaged a year and 6 months later. My nightmare all started on a cold winter day when I met my mother-in-law for the first time. Here's a little backstory. My husband was born and bred in North Carolina. He obtained his degree in finance and became an investment banker. Philip is the first child and only male, and he was born into a family of 6. However, Philip told me that my mother-in-law was married to his dad, Mark, for 12 years before they finally conceived. This put a strain on their marriage. Even though I don't have all the details, my mother-in-law began struggling with depression and anxiety as a result. Like anyone else, I was excited and nervous about meeting my mother-in-law. I had heard so much about her from Philip, my fiancé, and he mentioned that they shared a tight bond. I never spoke to her over the phone when they spoke while we were together. My husband tried to make us talk, but mother-in-law was always quick to brush him off, saying we would have enough time to catch up. I was born into a family of 4. Unfortunately, my mom had me out of wedlock and got married to my stepdad when I was 4 years old. To be honest, being married now, I can only understand the stress this can put on everyone. After almost 2 years of dating during this summer, my husband and I got married. Before our marriage, I barely knew his family, which was also due to my profession and the number of hours I worked. However, Philip and I spent most of our Thanksgiving, summer, and Christmas holidays together. When we fixed our wedding date, I introduced him to my family in New York City. We had our wedding in New York City in June 2016. It was a small, intimate wedding, yet the most joyful day of my life, as we both had families and friends support us all the way. My husband and I struggled to get pregnant in the first 3 years of our marriage. My mother-in-law lost her husband shortly before I got pregnant in the early weeks of March 2019. This made us create a tight bond with one another and never really had any of our folks spend time with us except during Thanksgiving. When we confirmed that we were 6 weeks pregnant and we were expecting a male child, we broke the news to my family. My mother was so happy with the news as she had just my sister and me. So having a male as her first grandchild, she expressed was the best thing that happened to her at an old age. My husband also informed his mom, and we agreed with my mother-in-law that she would move into our house as this would also be her first grandchild. My mother-in-law moved into our home just in time as we planned. In the first few weeks, it was a cordial relationship as we shared and talked about many memories. She shared stories about my husband's childhood with me and made fun of him, though I noticed my mother-in-law didn't assist me with house chores as I imagined she would. Often, I would come back from work and find out dinner needed to be made, which I felt was strange. I passively mentioned this to my husband, but he said maybe she's still trying to adjust to our way of living, and she also may not want to be too forward. We went on peacefully until a fateful day in my second trimester, when my husband and I had arranged to host our neighbor and a few friends over for lunch on a Sunday when I was off duty. I struggled to do many things during this stage of my pregnancy. However, I had no option as my mother-in-law barely assisted me in the kitchen or any other chores. For instance, laundry and grocery shopping. Her excuse for not helping with chores was that she suffered leg pains if she stood for too long. I made 2 main dishes as well as some snacks for our guests. We all sat at the table for lunch, and 30 minutes into our meal, I noticed my mother-in-law hadn't touched her food. I beckoned at her and asked why she wasn't eating. She said, "Your foods are always very salty and too spicy for me." Before I could offer an apology, she made a rather dramatic, loud, and long wheeze, pushed the plate away, and excused herself from the table. All through the time we sat at the table, I struggled to smile at everyone. The day remains one of the most embarrassing days of my life. I went to bed that day feeling miserable and wondering why we never got along. With the nature of my husband's job as an investment banker, he had to travel to different states for meetings and conferences. On the 1st of July 2019, my husband informed me that he would be away for 2 or 3 days for a conference. We discussed at length, and my mother-in-law suggested that his sister spend some time with us when he was away, another mistake I made. Being my first pregnancy, I had a lot of challenging moments, especially the morning sickness that lasted until the end of my second trimester. While my husband was away, a lot happened between my mother-in-law and me. One such incident was that I had a dental surgery with a client and called my sister-in-law Beatrice to inform her of my late return. To my greatest surprise, on getting home, I kept ringing the doorbell and there was no response. I had to call Philip, and how he was able to get to speak with them on the phone is still a mystery to me, as I had called both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law for over an hour on the phone and got no response. I still got no explanation or apology for being locked out of my own home from neither my mother-in-law nor my sister-in-law. Philip returned and I was happy, as Beatrice had no option but to return to her house since her brother was back. As I approached my due date for delivery, we went shopping for the baby items. My mother-in-law was pretty anxious and opted to go with us. While shopping, my mother-in-law kept picking things that we didn't need and kept muttering words like, "It's my first grandchild. I need to give him all the good things." I noticed right after this, she kept making a lot of financial demands. I was displeased, as this payment would be made from my husband's card, knowing our financial status as we were financing a mortgage at the time. On the day of my baby shower, my mother-in-law told me to my face that she wasn't going to assist me in babysitting as she couldn't stand me anymore. She said she started hating the moment she moved into our home. She carelessly referred to the day I had called Philip when I couldn't get into the house. She said Beatrice, my sister-in-law, and I intentionally locked the door from inside and pretended to be asleep. I unwrapped the gifts we received with tears in my eyes, wondering where I went wrong with her. I fell into labor in December of that year. While I was in discomfort, my mother-in-law kept saying I was exaggerating and that I was also disturbing the neighborhood with my loud noise, so insensitive of a mother who has children. I gave birth to our wonderful son and we named him Jesse. He came out with beautiful blue eyes. When I returned home from the hospital, I went on my knees to plead with her to forgive me if I had ever wronged her, and she smirked, saying, "Okay." The hatred continued from her end, and I had to call on my mother from New York City to come assist me. My mother did all the hot water bath and other duties I felt should be done out of love from a mother-in-law to her daughter-in-law. On one of the days, I was breastfeeding Jesse. My mother-in-law walked into the room and asked how long he would take breast milk. I told her I was putting him on exclusive, only breast milk for 4 months. My mother had to return to New York City when Jesse was barely 2 months old, and I was back to being alone with my mother-in-law. I noticed some positive changes with her. She started to assist with carrying Jesse, changing his diapers, staying up late with me most of the nights, but would only hand him over to me when it was time to feed him. The final straw broke the camel's back when I felt too comfortable with my mother-in-law and would leave Jesse with her for long minutes. On this day, I had to do some grocery shopping, and she agreed to babysit Jesse for me till I got back. 2 hours later, after I got back, my baby was still asleep, and it was pretty strange. I asked how many times he took the breast milk I had pumped into bottles for him. My mother-in-law smirked and said she threw the milk away and made the formula I was given at the hospital when I put it to bed. I felt awful and insulted, because she had no right to go against my wish, knowing my stand not to give the baby any formula. I said I had enough and wasn't sure the next thing she would do. I called my husband and told him all his mother had done. I asked him to kick her out of the house before I lose my child. My husband let her go, and my relationship with my mother-in-law went sour from that day. Next story. My husband, 41 male, and I, 36 female, are in dispute. He thinks I'm being selfish, and I'm mad he is being dismissive of my boundaries. His best friend, 33 male, let's call him Todd, wants to invite a girl, mid-20s I think, from another town, and wants this girl to stay at our house for 4 nights. Todd would also stay with us during this time. Unclear if they would stay in the same room or separate rooms. Todd lives with his parents and stays at our house 1 or 2 nights a month. The girl is in business with Todd, but also Todd may want to date her. Hard to know because Todd has never talked to me about this girl. I know nothing about her other than what I just shared. I explained to my husband that I do not feel comfortable having a stranger staying at my house for that length of time. I work from home and don't like the idea of having a stranger in my home while I'm trying to work. We have 2 dogs, no kids, one of whom can be a loose cannon with people he doesn't know. My husband works outside of the home, so the responsibility to monitor the dogs and be a good host would fall on me during 2 of my working days. I also worry that Todd will get the idea that anytime he wants to have sexy times with a girl, that he can just bring her to our house. Husbands see that as a problem. I think Todd is old enough and successful enough to get a place of his own and should do that if he wants to have a place to bring girls back to. My husband hates to say no to Todd. Todd is an official brother in his family and wants to be the kind of house that would take anyone in. I get that we have plenty of space, and to husband being around new people is not a big deal. As an introvert and homebody, I prefer to have time to myself and have trouble relaxing around people I don't feel comfortable with. Husband says I'm being selfish and he's disappointed with me. I told him he's dismissing my boundaries. I told him I'd be willing to compromise and allow them to stay 2 nights during the weekend, as I feel like I could get myself through that easier without the stress of them here when I'm working. Husband did not acknowledge my offer of compromise. He still wants me to agree to all 4 nights to help Todd out. So, am I the a-hole here? Not the a-hole. There is so much wrong here. Todd needs to put his girlfriend up in a hotel like a normal creepy guy who still lives with his parents and sneaks around. Your husband needs to realize it's your house too, and you're not turning it into Todd's brothel. You were willing to compromise and he wasn't. You've done your part. It's okay not to want strangers in your house. I wouldn't feel comfortable either. Also, why can't Todd just book a hotel? Weird. Not the a-hole. You offered a totally fair compromise, and your husband calls you selfish? So unless he and Todd get exactly what they want all the time, you're selfish and disappointing. Read the story back to yourself. Is this a Todd problem or a husband problem? You don't want a stranger in your home. Fair. You don't want to be responsible for hosting someone. Fair. You don't want your house to be used as a sex den. Fair. You then offered a totally legit compromise, half of the time and during a time where your husband can host, since he thinks it isn't a big deal. Of course he ignored that because that means he has to deal with all the stuff you don't want to, but he assures you it is no problem at all. Tell your husband he can prep the house, clean up the room, and wash the sheets after the sex party. I'm being mean here. And make sure he is home to entertain. If he can't commit to that, then no deal. If he can't commit to that, then he is selfish because he won't help out his friend Todd. Also, Todd sounds awful. 34, living at home in a situation where he can't even get a hotel or tell his parents he likes a girl? I can't. Next story. Throw away because this happened just a few hours ago. For some context, I, 25 female, live alone with 2 dogs. The first being an elderly medium big size, 18 years old, Bits, and the second a small 1-year-old Coda. I love both my dogs to pieces, but Bits refuses to eat or be inside our home. She used to be my parents' dog, and when they sadly passed away, I took her in because I knew none of my siblings would treat her right. At home, my dad built her like a space outside the house where she could be warm and cozy, kind of like her own room. But I don't live in that house anymore, and I haven't saved enough to build her that same thing here yet. For that reason, I always go to her at night around 8:30 or 9 to feed her, make sure she has water and that she's sleeping in her house and not in the grass. While doing so, I see a ball falling from the left side of my fence, the one facing the street, and before I can grab it, the neighbor's kid, 16 or 17, jumps my fence like nothing. I got so scared because it was the middle of the night and I live alone. Plus, at this point, I don't know it's my neighbor's kid yet, so I scream. I try to get up and Bit starts to bark, but I ran into my house. I see Coda running towards the kid and quickly bites his leg, and Bits tackles him. As I get to my door, I call them both and they run towards me. That's when I recognize him, so I make them stay there and go help him. I called his dad and they took him to the hospital, but 40 minutes after, the mom was banging at my door because apparently kids bit him in both legs and the hand when he tried to grab her, and she's demanding I pay the bill or she'll get my dogs taken. I refuse and tell her that she should teach her son not to jump other people's fences and that they only defended me. I have them both inside, but I'm starting to question if I was the a-hole or not. Not the a-hole. They need to teach their kids to not hop over strangers' fences. They need to teach their kids mannerisms that if they accidentally get their toys in somebody else's backyard, then they should go over to their neighbors and ask them to help them grab their toys. Their son basically trespassed your house. It's scary to see a stranger hop over your fence, especially when you're a woman, because it could be someone dangerous trespassing. Your dogs protected you. Kudos to them. Not the a-hole, that kid was trespassing, and surely you should file that before they do anything with animal control. People should learn that actions have consequences. That kid got lucky. For all he knew, he jumped over the fence of someone who had actually trained guard dogs. He wouldn't have survived with 3 bites alone. Next story. I, 35 female, make dinner pretty much every night. I recently took a break from working after having a baby. I stay home with her while my husband, 38 male, works. He gets home usually around 8:30 p.m. If he's running late or if the kids need to eat earlier, we have 2 others, I'll put his dinner in Tupperware and refrigerate it. Tonight he texted me while I was making dinner that he had to run to the store for work supply. I guess that they didn't have it and he had to run to several others. I had put his dinner on the counter thinking he wouldn't be super late and went to the bedroom to feed the baby. Well, he stormed into the bedroom at 10:30 p.m. where both me and the baby were sleeping and asked if I had left the chicken on the counter for 2 hours. I didn't know what time it was but said it should be fine. He told me he wasn't eating food that had been sitting out for 2 hours, that this was a great way to end a 9-hour day, and then scraped it into the trash. I told him he was being an a-hole and not to take this bad day out on me, and that if he was going to treat me this way, he could make his own dinner from now on. He said he will pick it up on his way home and that it will be warm. Am I the a-hole because I'm not making him dinner again after that? Update. I went out to the kitchen to get a drink and saw he actually didn't throw the food out. He left it on the counter and went to bed in another room. I went in there and asked if he wanted me to throw it out. We have battled an ant infestation for weeks, and he told me to get out. I reiterated he needed to stop taking his bad day out on me, and he told me to get out again. Not the a-hole, he's being massively unreasonable about this. So the dinner isn't warm. That's why we have microwave ovens. So he's had a hard day. Does he think you and your 3 kids, including a new baby, spent the entire day in a field blowing seeds off of dandelions? I'd never make him dinner again. F no. How dare he throw away food? My family of Mexicans would be so mad. They leave food out for a night and it's still fine. Cooked chicken doesn't go bad that fast. How petty of him. Until he grows up, I don't think you're in the wrong at all for not wanting to cook for him. I'm sorry you had to go through that. I would have ate it. Not the a-hole. You are his partner, not his servant. You put in the work to make him his dinner, and instead of being appreciative that he had a meal waiting for him, he complains because he couldn't even be bothered to microwave the damn thing. If he doesn't come to his senses and apologize, you are definitely not the a-hole for refusing to do anything for him until he learns to stop taking you for granted.